Hello, everybody. My name is Arturo de la Fuente from Eurostat, and I'm going to make a presentation about European climate-related statistics. I am the head of Eurostat Unit E2, Environmental Statistics and Accounts and Sustainable Development. As you know, Eurostat is the statistical office of the European Union, and we are a Directorate General of the European Commission. For this reason, before I enter into the work that Eurostat does related to climate change statistics, I'm also going to say a word about the different services of the European Commission involved in climate action. So first and foremost, let me say that climate change is a very cross-cutting phenomenon, and therefore there are diverse DGs or Directorate General of the Commission involved in it. The lead is, of course, under DG Clima, Climate Action. DG Clima is the service that is leading the work mostly about climate change mitigation, so related to greenhouse gas emissions, and LULUCF, land use and land use change, and forestry. And this service is also the one that represents the European Union in the COP international conferences that you know about. But the DG Clima doesn't work alone. There are other DGs. Another very important one is DG Energy, that does all the policy related to energy and also the transition to the renewable energies, also leading a lot of work related to insulation of buildings for heating and cooling, that this saves a lot of emissions of greenhouse gases. There is also DG Move about mobility and transport that leads the work on the green transition of transportation, the deployment of electric vehicles and the infrastructure related to them. DG FISMA, financial stability, are the ones leading the sustainable finance. If you know about the sustainable finance taxonomy, etc., this is work done by DG FISMA. And there are other DGs such as DG Agriculture, DG Environment, DG Grow. Grow is for internal market. They are the ones leading all the work about the businesses, about corporate sustainability reporting directive, etc. DG ECFIN, Economy and Finance, DG Trade. Trade are the ones leading negotiations with third parties that are on the environmental aspects and climate aspects of trade deals. So there are very many policy services of the Commission involved, and they need a lot of data, and some of the data, but not all, are produced by the European Environmental Agency, EEA, that produces all the official data for greenhouse gas emissions, and also Eurostat, that does the work that I will present in a moment, and the Joint Research Center, that is the research branch of the European Commission, and they have models about many things related to climate. So Eurostat has a lot of data in general, not only about climate, but data in general about the economy and the society that have useful applications for climate change. We have data about investments in the economy, about trade, about the extraction of natural resources and materials, energy, transport, agriculture, about economic production and consumption and productivity, about government finance statistics, government interventions, taxes, subsidies, capital transfers, etc., about jobs in the economy, and about social aspects and inequalities related to climate change or unrelated to climate change. So in general, we have all these types of data, and some of them have a more direct application to climate change, for instance, about energy, transport, agriculture. And I will leave a link at the end of my presentation about those. But I will focus the rest of my presentation almost exclusively about two areas that are very closely related to climate change, are about environmental accounts and energy statistics. So this is what the rest of my presentation is about. First, let me talk about environmental economic accounts. This is a satellite account of the national accounts that build the bridge between the environment and the economy. We use two international UN handbooks that you see at the bottom of this image. The System of Environmental Economic Accounting Central Framework, that is the core of what we do for now, and the System of Environmental Economic Accounting Ecosystem Accounts, the second handbook here, that is more related to ecosystems, natural capital, but also includes estimates about carbon sequestration by ecosystems. The main features of these satellite accounts is that they use the same asset and production boundary as national accounts. They use the same economic actors and classifications of institutional sectors, economic activities, etc. And they use the same definitions of subsidies, gross fixed capital formation, gross value added, etc. So they are very well aligned to national accounts, and they have a lot of applications for climate change, circular economy, biodiversity, and other similar topics. This is how it works in practice. We have data collections for the boxes in orange based on our regulation, so mandatory reporting. And I presented them here around a box for the ISA 2010 of national accounts. So the data collections that we have based on environmental accounting are starting from the clock at 11 o'clock, emissions of greenhouse gases and air pollutants, energy flows, material flows, these extractions of materials. This relates very much about circular economy, but it also has implications about emissions of greenhouse gases, about forests, the forest, about wooded land and forest land and timber, which also has implications about sequestration of greenhouse gases. Environmental protection expenditure. Expenditure here includes gross fixed capital formation and final consumption, and also intermediate consumption. And we are starting a dedicated data collection for climate mitigation investments this year in 25. We also have a module about the green economy sector, so green growth and green jobs, and about environmental taxes and subsidies. And the last module, natural capital, is halfway within the production boundary of ESA and outside the production boundary of ESA, because we include things that are outside, such as carbon sequestration by ecosystems and pollination. They are not economic activities in the sense of SNA. We work together in Eurostat with IMF, OECD, and other international agencies and countries to develop statistics about the climate change, in particular in the context of the G20 Data Gaps Initiative 3. There are 14 statistical recommendations to develop new statistics in this Data Gaps Initiative 3, and 7 out of them are related to climate. And in this area, Europe is a world leader. Really, many of the things that IMF are trying to implement at world level, we already have them in Europe. So Eurostat is supporting this work with the experience that we have built in Europe, in particular regarding 5 recommendations that you can see here. R1 about greenhouse gas emissions and footprints, R2 about energy accounts, R3 about carbon footprint of foreign direct investment, R6 about government climate subsidies, and R7 about climate change mitigation and adaptation expenditures. And in the next slides, I will present some results that are part of the contribution we are doing for this effort. It's just a selection of some results and key features. First, I want to present some figures of emissions of greenhouse gases based on environmental accounts. These are not the official data used to measure the progress of EU policies, because we have slightly different figures. This is because we record the emissions related to international transport in a different way. Our way is the same way as in national accounts. So it is based on the principle of residence of the economic units. So if an economic unit emits greenhouse gas emissions, we attribute them to the country of residency of this economic actor. So for instance, Ryanair is resident in Ireland, in the Irish economy, and we attribute all the carbon emissions of Ryanair to Ireland. And similarly, we attribute all the carbon emissions of Lufthansa to Germany, and so on and so forth. This is not the standard way in which it's done in international figures used to measure progress of the COP. But this is how we do it. And in addition to that, we also have a breakdown by economic actors. We show the names of the economic producers, as you can see in the left-hand side figure. And we also have an extra category for households, because the households emit carbon for heating and cooling of dwellings, and also for transportation and for electricity use. And we need a special category for the households that is not what the national accounts considers economic producers. And the category in this figure on the left is the light green. These are the households. On the right-hand side, you can see also a figure with a breakdown by greenhouse gas, because there are 7 types of greenhouse gases. And as you can see, in most economic activities, it's basically carbon dioxide, but in some cases there are other gases involved. Starting from these economic accounts, we can do modeling results and economic applications. This is one example about quarterly estimates. We produce quarterly estimates based on the annual data that countries report to us using some model, the same model as used for quarterly national accounts and quarterly GDP. And we present here the quarterly emissions with a breakdown by NACE together with the evolution of the GDP. This is another example of indicator for analysis is intensity when we divide the emissions by the employment. And for that we need a good alignment of the scope of the emissions attributed to the economy with the employment attributed to the economy. And this we can do in the context of the ESA and the environmental accounts. Another example is the calculation of carbon footprints. The footprints include the direct and indirect factors that lead to emissions by final demand. So all the emissions induced in the supply chains of businesses, for instance, are included in the carbon footprint. We produce estimates of carbon footprint using input-output modeling, so putting together the figures of environmental accounts I presented before with input-output tables, with Figaro tables in particular we use from the Figaro project. And here you can see the results for the EU. For instance, we are responsible for the direct emission of 7.9% of greenhouse gases and for the footprint of 9.2% of the global emissions. So we have a direct an indirect footprint bigger than the direct footprint. So much about the environmental accounts. Now I want to tell you about energy statistics. Energy statistics by Eurostat are the reference source to measure progress in the transition of renewable energies. And you can see some figures shown in the left-hand side. And on the right, you can see some breakdowns by economic activity, always based on NACE. Another type of data or indicator that we are publishing since 2024, is private investments related to climate change. These are private ones only. For the moment, we only publish the businesses' investments. And we want to extend the scope of it, including government investments and household investments with a data collection that we will start in late 25. We will publish by the end of the year or in early 26 investment figures by the businesses, government and households. The figures that we have published are based on business statistics, but we are implementing a new methodology more aligned to national accounts, to gross fixed capital formation, where we will also include some so-called investments by households that are more final consumption, in particular about electric vehicles and the charging stations associated to the electric vehicles. This is just a selection of a few of the things we do in Eurostat. I leave you some links here with more background information and other types of data, including transport and agriculture. So I really invite you to look at this content and come back to me if you have questions. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye.